Hold on. This is plugged in.
Welcome to Truth or Raps. So, this episode is going to be about word traps that you may fall into. Now, there are different word traps actually for different groups of people. It seems like each group of people might be given their own kind of word traps, actually. Now, I will say the word traps, the concept of word traps, sort of suggests that the words themselves are kind of spring loaded with a trap, but it's not necessarily the content of what you're saying, or at least it's not necessarily apparent to you that it's the content of what you're saying, which I guess you could say would be the case for anyone saying anything about anything, it being wrong, or it being traps. It wouldn't be apparent to that person maybe that there was anything wrong with what they were saying. So basically, let me put it like this. A word trap is when you say 2 plus 2 equals 4, but something in the words that you used to put that equation across was sort of like a cultural trap or some etymology thing that hit you in a way that you wouldn't have been hit otherwise. It wasn't based on the accuracy of what you said, it was based on the words that you were using. Although I will say there is sort of an emotional component, sort of an etymological component, but sort of a sense of what one is saying that that I think in many of these cases, and I might even point them out, or it might just be apparent by what I'm talking about. I think in many of these cases, it really is sort of at least an indication of laziness in terms of your thinking things through. Part of how I arrive at that is because, these are things that I've pointed out and that I'm pointing out here. And so if I was able to point them out in some way, then you might presume that someone else would have been able to if they thought about them, at least in the senses where it didn't take extra research so much as just thinking about what was being said and how it all lines up. Now, that a case where it would not be a word trap necessarily, or really, yeah, a case where I'd say it's at least less of a word trap would be where it's someone just sort of saying something abhorrent, and they're saying it because they've been sort of brainwashed or kind of clouded around a particular issue, uh, most likely and most heavily by the propaganda of someone else doing it seemingly intentionally in some way. And so they say something horrible, but they don't realize it's horrible because they don't even realize that the content of what they're saying has anything more to do with it than basically just a slogan behind it. So if someone talks about the death of the most innocent people on earth at the hands of so-called doctors and at the whims of actual mothers who have been brainwashed into thinking they're not mothers just because the baby hasn't physically exited their body yet. And so their body is the part that's not the baby's body because that is and always is the baby's body. I'm surprised someone like Mark Passio wouldn't talk about this more because he's all about personal sovereignty and my body is my property kind of thing. But then it seems like he goes either really soft on or just doesn't seem to talk about. But given his at least once repeated example of uh, someone's belief sets being able to hurt you if some extremist right wing person were to do something near a certain location because of what Mark Passio is calling political beliefs. And it's like, I mean, that's a relevant. Obviously, that's a relevant example in terms of like if you got hurt in a situation that you weren't involved in because someone else was doing something, no matter what they were doing, you could at least very much put a fault on that person for hurting someone that they wasn't even supposedly a part of the situation, and then more so you could criticize this and that, and you could say, violence is never the way, and you could say this and that. If you say violence is never the way, then you also must not be subscribing to government at all, because government literally, its sole function is violence, and that's the function that it doesn't allow for anyone else to do, but that it does as the method of its operations exclusively. But anyway, Mark Passio basically he points to the issue of innocent babies being killed, and he points to that issue as an example of extremism in the case of the people who oppose the babies being killed. And other than that, I don't know if I've ever really even heard him talk. Not that I've listened to everything Mark Passio's ever done, but I have listened to at least like 70 plus hours of his stuff, because I've listened actually more like 140 or 150ish probably plus hours of his stuff, because I've listened to at least some of his presentations. I think all of the natural law presentation at least once, accounting for all of it, unless I like looked away for a second or something, or wasn't sort of zoned out or whatever. And then like 60, did I say 60, 70 episodes of his podcast. So, I've listened to a decent amount of Mark Passio. I'm still not even halfway up to date with his podcast, and he does make a point now, and he started to, like maybe in the 40s or 50s of episodes, started to kind of start saying this. He makes a point to say, don't listen to the newer episodes, listen from the beginning to my podcast, What on Earth is Happening? But in any case, in any situation in the universe, really, it just would seem weird that Mark Passio is all about bodily sovereignty, and like, you don't have the right to, like, you don't have the right to harm me, but then it doesn't seem like he has anything to say about actual mothers saying, I want my child to die, usually just because, well, I feel some kind of social pressure about it, and I don't want to have a child. And they might say it's for like money and stuff like that, but I think sort of the social pressure and sort of the being looked down upon for having a child, and probably usually out of wedlock in this case, plays the biggest part of it. So it's basically like the mother is ashamed, and it's usually not. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. This wouldn't change the principle of not harming the innocent anyway. That would just bring in the principle of don't punish someone for the sins of their father. As crude as that may sound, or as harsh as that may sound, like that would be the principle if we were talking about women who had let's just put it that way, they did not want to get into the sexual situation that then produced the baby. But it's usually not that. Correct me if I'm wrong, and again, it doesn't, whether it is usually that or not, that doesn't change the principle of don't harm the innocent and don't punish someone for the sins of someone else. But anyway, it's usually not that, as far as I gather. It's probably a 99.9 repeating percent of cases, and ending, like the repeating number ending somewhere, for the percentage. Like this, and then maybe a couple thousand, however many as digits after that, but for the percentages. But it's just like, in most cases, and I'm not minimizing this. Like, it's a huge thing, raising a child, I would imagine. I'm not minimizing that at all, but I am saying, in most cases, the woman decided to take part in the sexual encounter, whether or not so-called protection was being used, whether or not she was thinking in some way or another that it wouldn't result in the reproduction that it's going for, similar to how if you eat chocolate cake, it will result in the digestion that it's going for. You could throw it back up, but that is an unnatural thing to do if you're doing it intentionally after eating perfectly good food. And you might say, well, chocolate cake actually isn't good for you. It's like, okay, the premise of what I'm saying there isn't about how healthy the food in particular is, so swap in a healthy food, and then the argument will be for that. If you eat perfectly fine food, and then you intentionally throw it up, let's say intentionally throw it up for a reason that isn't related to health, but it's just related to social pressure, how about that? Then that might elucidate things. Then the food is not naturally being ejected. Like it's unnaturally. And you might say, well, Matt, anything you do is biologically natural. And it's like, I'm saying the process of eating the food was headed towards digestion. The process of reproduction is headed towards reproduction. And while, hey, I understand that it's a huge deal to take care of a child and to raise a child and everything, but at the same time, that does nothing, zero. That does zero to change at all the principle of you took part in reproduction, and then if that reproduction is actually successful, then you now have a child, and it's like to say then that somebody should be killed because you don't want to deal with that is fallacious. But anyway, somebody who said something, this a word trap is not somebody who says something, say, in favor of killing a baby, and then it turns out that they're just using a slogan. They're just saying my body, my choice, and they have no idea what it actually looks like for that baby to be killed. And you might get a better idea of it by listening to, say, the testimony by Dr. Anthony Levatino, doctor in quotes, because it seemed, I don't know if he moved to a different kind of medicine or if he just so-called retired, but even a different kind of medicine. I don't know if he ever moved to medicine or if he just retired from his job there, but he was a killer of babies, and he talks about how he did it and what he did, and he talks about it for 2, 3, 4 minutes or whatever. It says quote unquote, again, abortion doctor destroys abortion in however many minutes on the thumbnail, and then I think the actual length of the video is slightly different than that, maybe a 2 or 3 minutes off, actually. I don't know, but in any case, it's horrific. It's horrific what he says, and I think most of the people who would just say, my body, my choice, it's not that they're falling into a word trap, although it's sort of a word trap, but it's more of an ignorance thing, or a nescience thing, because perhaps they were just never in the situation. It wasn't like they were actively trying to ignore it. Perhaps they just weren't in a situation where somebody was telling them, hey, we're giving you a lot of propaganda about this killing babies stuff, but this is what it actually looks like. But this is what actually happens. Someone's not likely to step out of the woodwork and say that to them. So it would require this person looking more into what was going on, and there are so many factors around it, aside from just laziness and stuff, that it is probably not likely. It is probably not likely that person ever will look into that stuff. So in a certain sense, they're ignorant of what actually goes on in my body, my choice land. But in another sense, they're nescient. Anyway, I've talked long enough, so I think I'm just going to give you one word trap. Maybe I'll do one new one every episode of Word Traps, because actually there's a decent amount to say about a lot of these, and there are so many of them. And I will say, though, I was drawing the distinction there. It's not a word trap is not a slogan that involves something that you don't really know about, but you could find out if you looked into it. When I say word trap here, I'm talking about a word that you're using to mean one thing, but that has sort of a hidden connotation, or kind of an occult or occulted definition somewhere in the etymology, where it's basically making fun of you for using it. Or I would say word trap could also be something where, the phrase "I appreciate you," for example. It seems to a lot of people, to my ears, that phrase is a really nice phrase, and when someone does something for you, you look at them and say, "I appreciate you." But in the actual usage of it, and really in the phrase itself, the trap, or maybe it's not a trap because it might just be them being kind of ignorant of this, but the wording itself says "I appreciate you" in response usually to someone that they perceive as being of lower social status, or at least being of low social status, whether or not they're of low social status as well in the same kind of way or by the same standards that they have doing something for them. It would be that this person is helping them in a certain way, like this person is a clerk, and the clerk literally just rings them up and gives them a receipt, and the person takes the receipt and says, "I appreciate you." That's basically the person taking the receipt and saying, "I think you're lower status than I am." Because they wouldn't be, I don't think they'd be first of all, like say someone that you really respect highly in terms of their social status and their capabilities and stuff and their skill is there. Say if you like Steve Jobs, say then somebody's going to say, well, Steve Jobs is dead, so that's a bullshit example. It's like it's a theoretical example to begin with. I'm just picking characters for it. But say if you who would be considered competent by many people? Okay. Mm, okay. So how about this? This might be a convoluted example. Okay, I'm wearing a Packers shirt here. Brett Favre. Brett Favre, famous Packer quarterback a couple quarterbacks ago now. He was a, multimillionaire. He was a famous quarterback. He was deemed a great quarterback, I guess, if a little inconsistent. I don't know that much about football, but basically this guy seemed to be like the picture of like a gritty, rough and tumble kind of guy who goes for like the Hail Mary, or he like goes for the big passes and he makes it. He's sort of like a movie hero, kind of like sort of a loose cannon maybe in terms of his play style. I'm not talking about any like nude texts he sent to somebody. I don't even know how that would be a scandal. Isn't nude texting to like significant others or to people that you're kind of like having things with, like, isn't, unless it was like just random texts sent to people. But even then, now I'm not saying that random nude texts are ever a good idea, like literally ever. I think it's a horrible idea at all times, even to people that you're in a marriage with, because it's a horrible idea. Just like I would say refrain from doing that ever. Say you clicked send on the wrong person. Say that person was underage. You're fucked for life. You're fucked for life. Like seriously, never. I would say never do that. But at the same time, it's like if in the realm where people do that with each other, it usually seems to be sort of. I mean, I guess it might happen in relationships as well, but from my outsider perspective to like pretty much a lot of like dating and stuff like that, it would seem to me that people would do that likely in sort of more physical kind of relationships that, or at least likely also in more physical kind of relationships and stuff. And those physical kind of relationships, it seems like there's sort of like some kind of risk taking involved with even attracting someone like that. So you throw in some spicy language here and there, and it's like, oh, like I'm gonna spice things up, and it's like the pickup artist kind of thing where you escalate. It's like I'm gonna escalate touch. I'm gonna pat her on the shoulder during a date or something, or like this or that or the other thing. It's like there are certain boundaries that I don't know exactly how else this would happen. It is sort of like there are certain boundaries that are progressed beyond in like the realm of dating or in the realm of relationships. I hate that word dating. It cheapens the whole thing and just makes it sound so egotistical and like, well, I am dating right now. It's like, oh, good for you, asshole. But in any case, it is it I it it. I would say in the realm of dating, it seems that while you're working your way up at least to some kind of like serious physical intimacy, even if people don't take it seriously and then they go and have the baby killed, but while you're, and that's like a whole problem with our culture, that people don't take physical intimacy seriously, that they don't look at the idea of having sex with someone as a very, very serious, high gravity thing to do. But in any case, let's go back to Brett Favre. Brett Favre, he's, I want to say this was back when he was like at the height of his career or something, or into his legendary days, but still playing football and stuff, and thus still perceived as like the most successfully that as the most successful in like someone's estimation of him that he might be perceived at a given point. But then I imagine someone might say, well, it isn't back then, it's now, so you've got to make your theoretical happen now. And then again, in that case, I would also say to you, theoretical situations are by nature not actually happening like physically so much as a possible situation and testing how would you feel about a certain thing given this character doing that thing in this situation with you when you are doing this thing. One. But in any case, the theoretical would be Brett Favre walks into a room. Say, I don't want to introduce too many variables here for the people who are going to say, well, theoreticals are fine, but if you introduce one thing that's not every person exactly in whatever state they are while you're actually saying it in the world somewhere, it's like it must be a theoretical based on everyone's condition at this exact moment rather than like that same person but just in a different condition or a different age. Anyway, they say Brett Favre walks in. You know what? Say Brett Favre is behind the... Well, you can't say Brett Favre is doing anything in particular. It's just Brett Favre, Okay. Say Brett Favre is behind the counter at a Walmart. And... yes. Say Brett Favre is behind the counter at a Walmart. He's... Okay, no. This is the best thing. Say Brett Favre is doing some kind of football signing at a Walmart. You go up, you have your football signed by him, and then you turn, and the person who's leading the line looks to you, and they say, wait a second. At the point that you entered the line, did you buy that football yet? And you said, no, I was going to go buy it after I got it signed. And that person sort of said, and Brett Favre kind of overheard this, that person sort of said, like, they didn't try to make it a scene maybe, but they felt kind of tension about it, and they said, I will have to take you over to that cash register, and then it will be that I'm going to charge you for this. I'm going to take you over to the cash register and charge you for this football. You've already paid for the signature back there, but I'm going to charge you for this football now. I'm going to take you right over. Why is he doing it in Walmart? I don't know. Anyway, like it's a Walmart in Wisconsin. I don't know. But, okay, so, or wherever he lives. Wasn't he from California or something? Anyway. That's sort of interesting as well. Brett Favre's a California boy pretending to be a Wisconsin one. But anyway. Matt, he's not pretending. Okay, anyway. Brett Favre hears this happen one time, and he looks over and he's like, hey man, what's going on? And the person, of course they're going to be very respectful to Brett Favre, perhaps not only because like he's some kind of celebrity, and even if they're working in Walmart, I'm picturing it as like a woman working in a Walmart who isn't particularly like invested in football and stuff. This is a quarterback, not even a current quarterback. He used to be on the Packers, and she's like, okay, like the Packers, that's big. But so like even she who like maybe doesn't even really know who Brett Favre is, she's kind of young. She's like in her mid-20s, maybe 24 and 6 tenths and 1, and she's looking at you, and then Brett Favre says something, and she looks over, and she's going to be very polite to him, not only because maybe he's Brett Favre, but also because he's Brett Favre, and she's sort of in some capacity working with Brett Favre today, and he's kind of her little boss today, even though, like, it's not like he has anything to do with her job, necessarily, but it's like, Brett Favre probably feels like an authority figure to her. So she says, "Oh, okay, Brett Favre. This person, they didn't buy a football, so I've just got to go ring them up for the football. They paid for your signature, but they didn't buy the football prior to coming in here, and so I'm gonna go and ring them up for it." And Brett Favre would say, "You know what? I've worked at a Walmart before," or he might not say that. If he hasn't done that, then okay, I guess he wouldn't say that. Either he has worked in some kind of like cashier thing before, and in this situation, he might preamble what he's about to say with, "Hey, I worked at a cashier before. Can I go ring him up?" And I mean, you might say, like, why would he go ring them up? But it's like, imagine if, like, there seems to be, like, kind of an unpleasant situation. Brett Favre is, like, sitting there in all his majesty or something, and he looks over and he feels like, I'm kind of the knight in shining armor in this situation. This person that I just had a little, like, 5-second chat with as I signed his football, he seems to, like, maybe being hassled by this girl who's working at Walmart. I'm not trying to make her seem like the bad guy, but I kind of want to smooth things over for everybody. So wouldn't it be fun if I went and rung him up for the football? And this girl probably, I mean, in a real situation, she'd probably be like, I don't think I can because you don't actually work here. But say she actually let him do it. Say she's like, okay, like, and say she was even standing next to him. Say, that's probably even better. Say she was standing next to him while he rung you up for the football over at the cash register now and held up the whole line. And he rings you up for the football, and you're like having a good chat with him, and you're like kind of joking around with him, and you're like, hey, this is like the time that you threw, through that game for like 7 touchdowns in like a Super Bowl game or something, like right after your father died and you had a broken thumb or something in the blizzard. And he's like, yeah, man, like I know, like haha. And then he hands you the football, or rather you pay him, or you put your card to the thing more likely, and then he hands you the receipt. Do you look at Brett Favre and say in the same way that you'd say to someone that you probably do, whether or not you even detected it in yourself because you might think you're too much of a good guy to, T-O-O there? Do you say to Brett Favre in the same way as you say to like some 19-year-old girl, I appreciate you?